Looking at this 1857 map, it's easy to view the Great Revolt as a sudden, isolated explosion of violence against British rule. But rewind the timeline a full century to 1757, and the historical record shows something else entirely. The 100 years leading up to the Great Revolt were marked by continuous, widespread, and violent regional uprisings. The company broke with pre-colonial tradition by removing the traditional channels through which the native population voiced their concerns. Their new legal system prioritized colonial stability and revenue extraction, leaving the existing social order with no defense against administrative or financial ruin. The company operated with a single, overriding objective: maximum revenue extraction. Land revenue demands were pushed to extortionist levels, even during famine years, forcing the peasantry into immediate crisis. To guarantee this extraction, the British weaponized a new class of collaborators. They installed landlords, merchants, and moneylenders who were protected by colonial courts and police, allowing them to systematically evict traditional landholders who couldn't meet the new financial demands. To understand the foundation of 1857, we organize this century of resistance into a four-part taxonomy matrix: civil, peasant, tribal, and Sepoy mutinies. The 1857 revolt wasn't an isolated event. It was the climax of 100 years of structural oppression and fragmented pushback. The first category comprises civil uprisings. These were spearheaded by the Old Guard, deposed native rulers, former zamindars, and traditional landlords known in South India as polygars. Their primary grievance was dispossession. The colonial administration sidelined these traditional elites, stripping them of their land and revenue rights to favor the new merchant class. These elites rarely fought alone. They drew mass support from ruined artisans and disbanded native soldiers, men whose livelihoods had been erased by the new colonial economy. Their objective, however, was strictly restorative. These semi-feudal leaders sought to reinstate the pre-colonial order and their own rank within it, rather than conceptualizing a modern independent state. On this map, early civil resistance began in Bengal, where a harsh economic order triggered the Sannyasi revolt. In Odisha, the Paika rebellion erupted in 1817 over eliminated land tenures. Down south, Polygar rebellion saw deposed chieftains organizing mass movements to protect traditional territories. These civil uprisings were violent and drawn out, yet because their leaders fought to protect narrow, localized interests, they failed to ignite a unified cross-regional resistance. Our second category shifts focus from deposed elites to the working peasantry. Their revolts were triggered by direct economic violence, from summary evictions, exorbitant land rents, and predatory money-lending practices. Because religion provided the dominant cultural framework of the time, raw economic grievances frequently mobilized under the banner of religious reform. Class struggle and religious duty became indistinguishable. In 1831, Titu Mir led the Narkelberia uprising in Bengal. What began as an Islamic reform movement organized Muslim tenants to physically resist taxation and evictions enforced by local landlords and British indigo planters. Similarly, the Faraisi revolt in eastern Bengal established a highly organized paramilitary structure. The movement instructed its tenant followers to actively refuse rent payments to landlords, eventually establishing its own parallel law courts. This photograph of Government House in Calcutta shows the imposing centralized structures the British operated from, insulated from the localized agrarian revolts they triggered. For the peasantry, the colonial state and its local proxies were identical targets. Their economic exploitation pushed them to wage holy wars against the administrative machinery enforcing their poverty. The third category, tribal revolts, requires splitting the map into two distinct zones: the mainland belt and the northeast frontier. On the mainland, the company imposed foreign property laws to privatize communal lands, systematically dismantling traditional tribal socio-economic frameworks. These new laws brought an influx of dikus, outsider moneylenders, traders, and revenue farmers. To the mainland tribes, these outsiders were hostile extensions of the British government, sent to seize their land and labor. The resulting pressure cooker produced the Santal Rebellion of 1855. Pushed out by debt and corruption, tens of thousands of Santals organized to declare autonomy, seeking to permanently end company rule in their territory. Looking at the northeast column on our chart, the triggers were different. Frontier tribes revolted primarily against direct political subjugation, military occupation, and the sudden imposition of new transit fees and forest levies. The Khasi Revolt in the 1830s exemplifies this frontier resistance, with local rulers mobilizing to violently resist British occupation of their hilly territories. Across both zones, tribal resistance shared a specific leadership characteristic. They relied on messiah-like figures who used ethnic solidarity to mobilize fighters, promising divine protection against the colonizers. But divine promises met the reality of industrial warfare. These groups fought with centuries-old weapons, bows, swords, and stone slings, against modern British artillery, guaranteeing their eventual suppression. These uprisings exhibited the highest degree of ethnic solidarity and militancy of the century, yet their geographic isolation and technological inferiority ensured they were crushed brutally. Our final category brings us to the East India Company's own military, the Sepoys. To understand their mutinies, we have to view the Sepoys as peasants in uniform. The native soldiers were inextricably linked to the populace. The severe agrarian taxes and social disruptions affecting their families in the villages translated directly into anger within the military camps. Inside the barracks, the company compounded this external anger with internal discrimination. Sepoys faced unequal pay, a lack of promotion opportunities, and the refusal of the government to pay foreign service allowances when deploying them to remote regions. Service conditions also routinely violated strict religious customs. Being ordered to cross the sea to fight in Burma, for example, meant a catastrophic loss of caste for high-caste Hindu Sepoys. This photograph of the native military apparatus shows how the British war machine relied entirely on Indian labor. When that labor rebelled, like in the Vellore Mutiny of 1806 or at Barrackpore in 1824, it proved that military uprisings were a chronic, systemic issue long before 1857. The British had constructed a highly unstable enforcement mechanism. They armed and trained the exact same population they were actively oppressing. If resistance across all four of these categories was so widespread and continuous for a century, how did the British manage to successfully consolidate power? This map visualizes the first major structural weakness, extreme fragmentation. These uprisings occurred in isolated regions, without any coordination or communication between groups. Second, these fighters lacked a unifying ideology. They were motivated by highly specific local grievances, a ruined land tenure here, a new forest tax there, not by a shared concept of Indian nationhood. Third, the leadership offered no modern alternative to the colonial state. Relying on traditional, semi-feudal leaders meant the resistance was culturally backward-looking, unable to present a cohesive vision for the future. Finally, there was a severe tactical mismatch. Insurgents utilizing centuries-old cultural forms of rebellion were continually outmaneuvered by the deception, strategy, and superior firepower of a modern imperial army. The British systematically exploited all of these fractures. They pacified the less obstinate groups with minor, localized concessions, freeing up their military to brutally crush the isolated holdouts. Despite their military failure, these fragmented uprisings accomplished something vital. They established deep local traditions of resistance, proving that the populace would not accept subjugation passively. This photograph of the ruined residency in Lucknow captures the fallout when those deep-seated, century-old grievances finally intersected. The 100 years between the Battle of Plassey and the Great Revolt were defined by a cycle of resource extraction and local armed response. These scattered struggles created the tactical and psychological framework that would eventually allow disparate groups to strike against British rule.